when do I know enough HTML to move on to CSS? When do I know enough JavaScript to move on to a framework? Does it really help you fulfill your goal, right? And so one mistake I made was I would, pick up a big book and think, oh, if I read this book from cover to cover, I'll be an amazing programmer. I can get a job.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Developers Cafe podcast. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Alex Booker, who is the host of the Scrimba podcast. In this episode, we discuss about the challenges faced by self-taught developers, how to overcome those challenges, and a lot more stuff. Before starting, please press like, share and subscribe so that this video can reach more and more number of people. And as always, enjoy this one. Wait a second. Make sure to stick around until the end to see if Alex could beat Siddharth and make a new high score for the leaderboard. Hey Alex, welcome to this show. How are you doing?
Hey man, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing fantastic. Very excited to be here. So my thing nowadays is I'm very passionate about helping new developers break into tech. And this is for two reasons. Like the first reason is that I myself am a self-taught developer. When I was like 18, 19, I sort of figured coding might be something I'm interested in, but I didn't really have university as an option because I didn't have very good grades and school just didn't sit that well with me. So I started learning on YouTube and things like that. Along the way, I kind of realized that knowing how to code and program is just one part of the problem, and being involved with other people, collaborating in community and things like that are important as well. And the other reason is to do with my work at Scrimba, where I host a series of weekly events and produce content weekly all around that same subject of helping people learn to code and break into tech. So for example, I host a weekly podcast, a weekly Twitter space, I make a weekly YouTube video. All of this is around helping people learn to code and give them tools and ideas, inspiration, and sort of some belief in themselves that they can succeed in tech. So
Alex, as you mentioned that you could not take the right path, or as they say, the conventional path to becoming a software developer. So what sort of challenges you faced becoming a self-taught developer?
That's a great question, as I think every self-taught developer has their own unique challenges. But the fortunate thing about my position, sort of working with a lot of new developers, is I notice a lot of the kind of common patterns and things I struggled with, 6, 7 years ago, people are still struggling with today. And actually, coding is hard. Like it takes time to build that problem-solving skill, learn syntax and how tools connect and things like that. That will always be a challenge, right? But, that's kind of known. Like we know we have to learn that stuff. It's the things you don't know that will get you, like making sure you're learning the right things and aligning by a goal. Like I personally love to learn, and so one mistake I made was I would pick up a big book and think, oh, if I read this book from cover to cover, I'll be an amazing programmer, I can get a job. But what I didn't realize is that even though that sort of information was kind of useful, it wasn't really bringing me as close to my goal as efficiently as possible, because most companies don't hire you to regurgitate a textbook. They hire you to solve problems with other people. So I think a big challenge was sort of creating your own curriculum and your own learning path, right? Because when you go to university, there are challenges, absolutely. It's still difficult. You have to push yourself and it's effortful. But at least you have a curriculum or a syllabus and you have checkpoints, right? Like tests, and you can compare yourself with your other sort of students and see how you're getting on, maybe learn where your weak spots are, where your strengths are. I think when you're a self-taught dev, and again, this is a big challenge I faced, is I was just, I had blinders on. I was just about the code. But what I learned over time is that getting involved with other people is one of the best ways to make yourself job ready, because you will be collaborating on things, but also building those other essential skills like actually completing projects, right? That's a great way to align compared to just reading a textbook cover to cover. And obviously collaboration is really important as well. It can be lonely, man, like learning to code by yourself, like it can be a lonely endeavor. Maybe your friends in person don't get it, or you struggle to meet other coders. I was spoiled when I moved to London finally, and I could go to a coding meetup and oh my God, there are other people like me. It was an amazing feeling. But at the time, learning to code in Wales, it was kind of lonely, to be honest. Like all my friends were people, like not even friends really, but I looked up to so many amazing people online because they were making like inspiring YouTube videos and stuff. I don't think there was as much sense of community back then, but I'm very excited for anybody listening on this path, because there are just so many sort of online meetups, Discord communities, tech Twitter and things like that I think will not only sort of help you overcome some of the challenges I faced and many others do, but make your experience more enjoyable, right? Because when you're having fun, things tend to come a little bit easier. Like you don't need as much motivation to like play Fortnite for 8 hours compared to coding for 8 hours because you're having fun with it, you're with your friends. I think bringing an element of that to your studying will help you sort of do it for the long term sustainably without burning out in such a way that makes you successful.
I totally agree, Alex. Alex, as you mentioned that coding is not about reading a book from cover to cover. It's about networking with people. So did networking come to you naturally, or did you have to, struggle hard for it?
Oh, that's a great question again, because, and I will have to think a little bit because I know my nature, and I am by nature an introvert, but that doesn't mean that I'm shy or that I'm not outgoing. I'm a very curious person, and so for me, I had to sort of hack networking, I would say, and tap into my personality. And so, if I'm a curious person, for example, and you might understand why I host the podcast with this in mind, I just like to ask people questions. And so, instead of thinking about networking as being really charming or making the perfect intro or having the perfect elevator pitch, I approached it in a different way. I thought, who is genuinely interesting to me? Because if I get in front of that person, I will naturally have questions for them. They will feel like good, I hope, because someone's interested in them and what they're doing and they're being helpful. But obviously, it's a great way to get to know them, and they see a little bit of where your curiosity is coming from. That can help with your sort of professional endeavors. The other way I would hack it is thinking about networking less like a small table in a room with drinks and business cards. Like that's sometimes what we think of when we think about networking, but it's really more about making friends and building authentic connections with other developers who might be a bit ahead of you. Maybe they have an opportunity for you in the near future. But I also think there's a great benefit in just being authentic, because your friends, as you bring each other up, well, in a year or two, thinking in the long term, even though your goal might be more short term, you have to realize that in a few years, they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember Alex, like, we were coding this thing a few years ago. They bring you with you, right? And you can do the same. So with that in mind, I felt like the best way to achieve that was to collaborate on projects. So again, think about it less like being charming and approaching people like without anything to say. Be like, oh yeah, you've got a really cool project, like can I get involved? And you sort of show them some goodwill and say it's an open source project and you're new. That can just be downloading it, running it, and letting them know what your experience was like as a new developer. It could be fixing a typo. Again, just sort of maybe tacking onto your last question a little bit. There are so many challenges as a new taught developer, as a self-taught developer, and a new developer in general. Mostly we sort of underestimate our ability to contribute value to others since we're new and we're always comparing ourselves with people on Twitter who are obviously highlighting their best work, right? It's always the highlight reel on social media. You don't always see the struggle. But as a new developer, you can absolutely sort of meet people and network by just showing them your enthusiasm, either with questions or by collaborating in some sense.
I totally agree, Alex. Those are great points there. Alex, coming back to your point on collaborations, I feel that not everyone is approachable, right? Because there's, to a certain extent, some people feel like they have their own space. So how can you manage with those things?
Well, to be honest, like there are millions of developers out there, and of those millions of developers, there's bound to be people who just have no interest in you, and that's okay. There's plenty more fish in the sea. You can move on, but obviously you can't know necessarily their demeanor before you approach them, and so generally, I think the best thing to do is just to approach them with politeness and a bit of self-awareness, maybe. For example, I'm trying to think. So say you make a pull request on a repository, have a little bit of empathy for the person on the other side. Like they might come across short, or they might come across a bit blunt and like they don't want to talk to you. But actually being an open source maintainer is a pretty thankless job. Like you get thousands of issues every morning. People are sort of demanding that you fix things and update things, but you're not being paid to do it. You have a family to support. This isn't your priority. It's a project that evolved, right? And likewise, say you want to connect with somebody, maybe on a one-on-one basis, or maybe you want to chat with them on a Zoom call or something. More people are open to it than you might think. You just have to ask, but you have to frame your question in the right way. Like I personally have seen this among some of my, like I host a lot of Twitter spaces, right? So I speak with a few other mentors and people who are creating content, and all of us have this feeling that people sometimes just send quite brief messages like, hi, hey, can I chat with you? The first rule, I think, is to sort of put your ask very specifically in your first message, so you make it easy for the person to work with you and to want to engage further, since you give them an idea about what you're looking for. There's less back and forth. And then yes, when I talk about politeness, I mean, just give people an escape hatch. It's quite nice just to say, hey, I totally understand that you must get a lot of questions and notifications. If you can't do this, if you're not interested, no worries whatsoever. So I do think it's important you approach approach it with that sort of human aspect and a little bit of empathy. But to
Exactly.
your point, there are definitely people who just have no interest in others. That could, again, could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's their personality, maybe they're going through something tough. But at the end of the day, well, there are also some people who I think could do better at being gentler towards beginners. I don't think we're here to talk about open source in any great depth, but it is a good example of a place where you can put forth some effort and get rejected quite harshly. So don't just think about it in terms of open source, but think in general. When someone doesn't get back to you or they respond quite bluntly, again, you can try and empathize with their situation. But I do think as someone in a position of being a maintainer or somebody who's built an audience, it is the right thing to do to show people a bit of like patience and be polite and encouraging, because as a new developer with so many difficult things going on, I can understand how even a small comment or a negative comment can affect your morale. But we can't always control these things, right? As individuals, we can only control how we sort of react to them. And so when you're in that position, it's important to try and empathize with how things are going. And remember again that there are more fish in the sea. Like there's always someone else who might help you, and you only need a couple of people in your circle really to find success. Like you don't need tens and tens, certainly not hundreds. It's only a couple out of these millions. So I think that's a useful perspective to have.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Alex. Alex, when you mentioned open source, as a self-taught developer or a new developer for that matter, open source can be very overwhelming at first. So how do you think that should do you think that a self-taught developer should embrace it? I mean, he should learn it while on the go and start contributing while learning, or do you think that it should be left aside for a while and just focus on yourself? And after you have gained confidence, you are you think that you have mastered your own tech stack, only then you should contribute to open source and that sort of stuff.
You know, everybody is different, right? And I mean that in two ways. Like, one, we're all built differently and we learn differently and we think differently, but also we're in different circumstances, right? And you can imagine maybe a scenario where you're learning to code because your friend got you into it. And then, yeah, you can collaborate on an open source project together. It probably isn't much of a consideration. And maybe that's what you want to do as well, because you feel that you would like to just jump in the deep end and you have some support and that works for you. But take a polar opposite example, someone who's stumbled into coding. Maybe they were working in a different type of industry completely before. They're in the Midwest or something, and they don't have any tech hubs or meetups or anything, and they're completely by themselves. I can totally understand your question. Like, it's really overwhelming and it's really difficult to get started. Not only do you have to learn Git, you have to learn GitHub, then you have to learn the difference between Git and GitHub, right? And then obviously you have to find the projects, and then you have to navigate pull requests and all the rest of it. What I would say, and I don't really mean to plug this specifically, but I do know that there is an individual in our community who does a fantastic job, and I'm very happy to sort of mention them. And their name is Eddie, and they have a Discord community called Eddie Hub. And I have to say, even though, Scrimba, we have our own Discord community, I think if you're looking to get involved with open source, you can find your tribe at the Eddie Hub community. I genuinely wish I knew about something like that when I was getting started, so I'm happy to recommend it. But their advice, I think, sort of falls into a few different categories. I can summarize high level, but you'll always want to do a bit more research and see what works for you. But essentially, there's two good ways to get started. The first way is to contribute small contributions, right? They could be typo fixes, they could be example projects, they could be documentation updates, and maybe you try a technology. Say you use React Router, for example, which is a library often used in conjunction with the React library to help you navigate URLs and show certain pages when someone goes to a certain URL. You could try and learn that as a beginner and find that just the example code does not work. Maybe they just completely forgot to update a dependency. You can make the issue, and believe it or not, just by asking a question and presenting a sort of problem, you are contributing to the open source project. Is there something you can then go to an employer and say, hey, I contributed to React Router? Well, technically maybe, but I wouldn't exactly recommend it. The real opportunity is then to sort of use that first issue or pull request as a way to connect with the maintainers. And maybe once the issue is resolved or you've had a conversation, say, hey, I'd love to get involved. Do you have any advice? Just in general, people tend to reciprocate when you show a little bit of good faith and you do something to begin with. The second way to sort of get involved with open source is, forget about the existing repositories, separate your ego. I understand, like, it would feel amazing to contribute to React or Linux and say you did that. It'd be such a proud feeling, but you don't need to do that. Like, you can work on a much smaller project. It could be an adjacent smaller library with 10 stars. If anything, think about it like a ladder. Maybe you start with those smaller projects, but through that experience, you can then start your own project that gets thousands of stars. You build the next, maybe not Linux, but maybe some kind of adjacent library for a framework, right? And so yes, like, I do think it's difficult, but I do think it's worthwhile as well, because you do two things when you contribute to open source. Like, you practice that collaboration skill and muscle, which is so important. I can point you almost to a GitHub pull request that I made when I was learning to code, and I'll be honest, I look back at it and it makes me cringe. I feel like I think I missed some points. I think I was too direct. I think the pull request was too big. A good principle, by the way, is to make small incremental changes, because it will make it easier for a maintainer to digest and then process and pull in your changes. But frankly, it's not as embarrassing as it might sound, because when you look back at something and you're embarrassed by it, that just means that you've grown in that time. And if I can do it and learn how to sort of collaborate with people efficiently, then you absolutely can as well. And that's through open source, mind you.
Alex, as you said that someone should not contribute to React or Linux just for telling it to a recruiter that, hey, I contributed to React or Linux. Yeah. So what do you have to say to that mentality? Because I feel that that's totally opposite to what open source is about. It's about collaboration. It's about helping others, start working with others. And when you get into open source with a competitive mindset, you take that away.
It's a good question. I think that in development, there's a lot of ego for quite an understandable reason. Like, I sometimes think about like the fitness industry and stuff, and like, if you want to sell a fitness product, you kind of have to be in really good shape. Like, it helps you sell products. Exactly. And that's why people take supplements and sometimes drugs to enhance their physique and things like that. I do think that there is this kind of almost problem where there is this feeling that to be a really successful developer, you need to build an audience. And the way you do that typically is by, posting jokes on Twitter or sharing threads or engaging with big accounts, almost ass kissing at times, to be honest. But this isn't really like a reflection of the real world, right? It's like the, what's it called? It's called the survivorship bias principle, where of course you see the things that survived, right? And likewise, the people with the loudest mouths are often the ones you see the most, even if their opinions aren't valid. But what you have to realize is that we build this worldview based on a few hundred people we follow and see and watch on social media and GitHub and things like that. But the development industry at large is millions and millions of developers. Scott Hanselman has a really interesting post called Dark Matter Developers. This idea that the mass majority of the web, the mass majority of software is built and maintained and loved by people you will never ever hear of, in part because they don't want to be heard of. And so when you're new to coding, it just so happens, and I don't have a strong view on this as such, but it is true that when you're brand new to learning how to code, you're going to go to places like Twitter, you're going to come across blogs, and you're going to come across tutorial courses and things like that. And as it happens, this has a really large intersection with people who are like sharing quotes and jokes and things that might not necessarily contribute to your success. But bringing it back to your question, I think it's this, what I said sort of relates to open source, because it is a little bit about ego. Like, what is your goal really? Like, if you want to contribute to a Facebook project and say you contributed to a Facebook project, it's peacocking, right? Like, you're going to feel really good, you're going to feel special, I think, but does it really help you fulfill your goal, right? Is your goal to like look cool and like a pro developer to others, or is your goal to actually like be a great developer? Is your goal to actually contribute to a team? Is your goal to change the world through software? Is your goal to achieve financial independence through freelancing, right? And if so, I don't really see how contributing to a huge project necessarily helps with that. Meanwhile, finding a project that you genuinely care about because you use it, or because you like the idea, or because you wish you had the idea, you're like, damn, I wish I had this. Don't worry, you don't have to go and make your own. You can contribute to the one that exists potentially. That's a cool opportunity. This is where you are more likely, I think, to find success genuinely, because again, with a huge repository, there's a lot of stressors, right? When projects get to a certain size, it's very hard for maintainers to give you that one-on-one sort of mentorship. But if you can find a project, and maybe another way of approaching it is just finding an individual. Maybe you come across a maintainer on Twitter and they tweet a lot about helping new programmers and they have some open source projects. You can be pretty sure about the same kind of person who's going to make sure the documentation is up to date and approachable for new people. They might not jump on a Zoom call with you right away, to be honest, because that's very difficult. Actually, it takes a lot of time and energy. But if you show some goodwill, like I described previously, and make some updates and show your intention to improve the project, they might be like, okay, this is a person worth investing in. And if you think about it, like if you really think about it, that is a microscopic example of what it's like to get a job as a developer. Nobody really wants to hire you and take a huge risk on you because you might not be worth the time. This is not a comment about any individual person listening. It's just the truth that when someone posts a job, they get hundreds of applications. Many of them are just not suitable at all. And so for that reason, they have to protect their time and energy. The onus is really on you to sort of show that good faith in the first place and try and earn an opportunity. It doesn't take much, right? It can just be sort of showing that you understand the project, right, through a thoughtful message, or it could be a contribution, just a small one.
Alex, so far we have talked about self-taught developers and what practices should they follow. You being yourself experienced in this field, I would love to know your thoughts on what sort of path you should follow when you're learning a tech stack. Should you look to tutorials? Should you look to documentation? Should you look to YouTube videos? What sort of path should a self-taught developer follow?
I don't mind repeating myself because I think this is really important. And one thing I said before that I wish to reiterate to anybody listening is to like start with your goal. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we're all different and some things are going to resonate more with others. And so if I break those points down a little bit, I think starting with your goal is crucial because take my example, take my mistake reading a textbook. I just didn't know better. If I could go back and give myself advice, I would say, go on LinkedIn, go on job boards, go on angel.co. Stack Overflow Careers, I think, is disappearing, but there will be other job sites in the future. And look at the jobs that are like genuinely exciting to you because of the company, because of the people, because of the location, because of the package, because of the technologies, and then align by that, right? Like learn the things in that job ad because that's going to bring you closer to where you actually want to be, right? In terms of the learning methodology, which is more to your question, I think we all do learn slightly differently. But of course, if we're learning the wrong things, that if we're memorizing and we're understanding the wrong things, but doesn't bring us closer to our goal, that's kind of a waste of time. So it is first important you set a clear destination. It's then up to you to sort of devise your path, and that can be difficult. What I would say is look for existing curriculums that other developers, genuine new developers, have found success with. I think I want to be like fair and not unbiased, but the truth is the reason why I work at Scrimba and the reason why I'm involved with the project is because I think we're solving this problem in a very sort of meaningful way. I won't say too much about Scrimba except that we have a career path that has 13 now modules that take you from not knowing code to eventually being able to build applications independently. And the reason why I'm talking about the path part is because it takes away some of that decision making, like when do I know enough HTML to move on to CSS? When do I know enough JavaScript to move on to a framework? Which framework do I pick?
Exactly.
We encourage you to use React, not because it is unequivocally the best. There are advantages of every framework and technology, right? That's why multiple exist, but because it's easy to get lost in that decision-making process when really we encourage you to stay on the path, practice what you're learning, and sort of build your ability to build applications. It is also true, and despite my wanting to plug Scrimba because I genuinely endorse and believe in it, it's also true that we always encourage students to use a variety of platforms because, to be absolutely honest, like we tend to learn really well when we combine different resources. And I think if you stick blindly to one, I think it's good to have a tree trunk, right? Like the career path, like to have a clear sort of path and starting points, but you're very welcome to branch off in any direction you see fit. And that's where like documentation on a subject can come in handy. That's where YouTube videos on a subject can come in handy. There are GitHub repos full of tips, right? And markdown files that can be super handy. You can have one-on-one conversations with people. There's lots of ways to learn. And for many years, I believed in this idea that we each have our preferred learning style. Some people are kinesthetic learners, which means they like to get their hands dirty and touch things and feel them and see the impact of what they're doing. Others are reading, writing learners. They learn best when they read and write and do it with prose, right? And there are a few others, but actually this whole system falls down because new research kind of revealed that we learn best actually when we combine multiple sorts of learning styles. So I can give you an example, which is like when I was learning arrow functions for the first time. Yeah, okay, I read MD end. I read about them. I did not understand. I did not get them. So I watched a YouTube video. I kind of got them now, but then I was like, had a few more questions than answers by the time I finished that video. So to be honest, probably I went to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I had a bit of a better understanding, because again, when you're learning, there's two learning states. There's like a focused learning state where you're actually like consuming the information or practicing and coding, but there's also like a diffused learning state, which is when you just let the dust settle and your brain does a bit of processing in the background. It's the same reason why if sometimes you're stuck on a coding problem, but you take a little break, you come back and you know the answer, that rest is actually really important, which I think is, there's some really ambitious junior developers out there, and I do love to see it, but you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Like you can't just, push past your limits because you have willpower, right? You need to recharge and you need to give yourself an opportunity to process the information. But to finish the anecdote, the next day I'm still not sure, but maybe now I watch a Pluralsight module or a scrim, and then I start practicing the code. Now I know enough, and then all of a sudden the concept sets into place, right? It's like the amalgamation of different learning styles that works the best for virtually everybody, actually, according to, and when I say research, let me give the source. There's a really good book called Make It Stick that talks about the science behind learning how to learn. Like, what is the best way to approach a hairy subject? How do you then ensure that what you're reading and consuming sticks in your brain and doesn't just go in one ear and out the other? And it's a very interesting book because a lot of the commentary in it is about how the traditional sort of advice about how to learn, you go to school and they tell you to sort of highlight everything. And we get this impression that just by highlighting and rereading the text that we're remembering it, but that just makes you familiar with it. It doesn't mean that you've actually understood it. And so for that reason and more, it's very important that you sort of learn how to learn. So I truly appreciate the question, because if you can invest just a little bit of time to learn how you best learn and what methodologies are available to you, you're going to grease the wheels and I think smooth the whole process and find success more. It's not always about efficiency. Like, maybe you're willing to take your time, and I don't think you need to put a strict time limit on yourself if you can help it, right? If your situation allows. But generally it's more fun when we actually feel like we're making progress and not just spinning our wheels.
Awesome, Alex. I love the answer, by the way. Alex, can you just now finally play my A to Z speed test?
Yeah, man. I'm excited for this because I'm a pretty rapid typer.
Oh, this is awesome. This is awesome. Awesome, Alex. It was lovely having you here, talking with you. I mean, I learned so much. I'm sure the listeners will gain so much out of it. So thanks for taking out time and sharing your valuable tips and experience with the community.
I loved it as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As you know, I host the Scrimba podcast every week. We upload a new episode with either a newly hired developer so that you can learn from someone just a few steps ahead of you, or I speak with a hiring manager or recruiter or a senior dev who hires juniors. So you kind of learn it from both sides. But I'll tell you what, as a guest, it's a fantastic experience because you help me sort of think through some of these subjects and give me just a little bit more empathy for anybody I might have on in the podcast in the future. So thank you very much for that. I hope it was useful to people.